All right, welcome back to the Citylight Family Podcast, a podcast for ministry leaders, young and old. It's our desire to equip ministry leaders and encourage you along the way. And I am with our great friends, as always, my co-host, Jared Cleaver in the house.
What's up, y'all?
Come on now.
Glad to be here.
And we've got some special guests. So the topic today is we're talking about singleness in the church. And really, how do we as pastors, elders, leaders see singles, care for singles, minister to singles? What's this look like? And why is this an issue that we need to talk about? We want to talk about our current reality. And so we're going to go all the way down there. Oftentimes we talk about next generation and kids, and there's a lot to have conversations about. But we as elders need to be thinking about, how do we care for the whole flock? And a portion of our flock might not be married yet, might not be parents yet. And so we need to have that conversation. So that's where we're going today. And we've invited our friends, Brittany Kaiser. You can say hi, introduce yourself, and tell us where you do ministry, and our friend Jake.
Yes. Hey, I'm Brittany Kaiser. I work at Citylight Lincoln Church, and I'm excited to be here. Come
on. Brittany's been a day one, man. I mean, you got, first of all, your dad is Chuck Kaiser, who's a pastor in Iowa, church planter. Mm-hmm. You guys kind of came to Citylight Omaha for a while, and then you've been down in Lincoln for, it feels like day one. I
have been in Lincoln since day one.
Day one,
6
literally
years.
Helped plant that church. And so I remember sending Austin down there and Mo, and you surfaced and were like, I have some gifts with administration and service, and if you need help, I can do that. And so just to honor Brittany, she's one of those people that has walked through a season of singleness. She's still there, but has leveraged her life so well. That's why you're here. That's why when we were saying, who would we want to have on this podcast to learn from? You have leveraged your life so well, invested in women, the local church, used your gifts, encouraged your pastors. Your voice has encouraged your pastors to stay in the game. And so it would be hard to tell the story of Citylight Lincoln without talking about Brittany. I mean, it's that level of impact. And so anyways, we're so thankful you're here and you're going to help us talk about this issue. Brittany's also spoken at our Citylight Family Conference, the Multiply Conference. Mm-hmm. We regularly ask her to teach breakouts on this issue. So we're excited to have her. Jake, introduce yourself and how you serve within the Citylight family.
Yeah. Jake Peterson. I work at Providence Church, and I get to do college ministry over there.
Awesome. So as we talk about this, and why are you here? Why is this a personal issue for you? Can I just both ask you guys why as we talk about singleness, is this personal to you? Why is this something that you're passionate about? And kind of how are you investing in singles now? So go ahead. I would love to hear, Jake.
100%. So I came to Omaha for college and had some dudes I came from high school with. We were all Christians, and just throughout my college years, experienced community that was just so different from what I experienced in high school. It was amazing, and had guys I could confess sin with, guys who encouraged me, guys who'd sharpen me all the time. And my junior year of college, the three guys who I was closest to all got married within the span of a year. And so I had these really deep connections living with these guys, and then they all got married, and we didn't live together after they got married, which is a good thing.
Probably good discipleship.
Yeah, absolutely. And so they all got married, and then so two things happened. One, there's just a physical separation of I don't live with these guys anymore, so I'm not spending as much time with them. They're focusing on their most important ministry to their wives and taking care of them and loving them, which meant that there was going to be less time for me. And then also just sometimes because they're exploring this new area of life, something they've never been here before, and so they had this shared common experience of hey, how are we good husbands? How do we do this? Mm-hmm. And oftentimes I would feel left out because I'm single, I'm not in the same place. And so it felt like there's some physical distances that were created, and then also some emotional and relationship just separation that was there. And as I continued on, my junior year of college was just super depressing, and I felt very lonely, and just sort of asking where my community, where my friends at. And along the lines, I remember hitting up Colt and Emily Wakefield and expressing to them hey, I feel like I'm kind of left behind, and they love me so well, and all the time, being able to just go hang out with them, having late night conversations. I felt so loved, and so just communicating that to them. They loved me, gave themselves up for me, were the most hospitable people to me, and that just changed my perspective on the relationships between people who are married and people who are single. And so working at Providence, lead a young adult city group. And so it's for married people, single people, but people who are in the young adult age demographic. And with that, as I met my wife Rochelle by the grace of God, and so we've been married. And there's sort of like when we got married, there's sort of like this temptation for married couples to sort of transition out of young adult to transition out of city groups that are mostly single people. And as I had experienced like not trauma, but just like hardship through feeling like left behind, we decided as we talked through that together of like, okay, we're getting married, but we're not going to leave our single friends behind. We want to be present here. We want to give them wisdom, and we want to do our best to like fight for relationships, closeness with the people in our city group, and not just leave them and go someplace else.
Wow. That's awesome, Jake. So you're literally get married and say, hey, what if like some of my wounds and pain points became part of our passion, right?
Yeah,
I've been on this side of it and know what this feels like to lose brothers and sisters that were really key to my development. You kind of lose that covering, that proximity, and that's awesome that you're saying, hey, we want to actually cultivate this. Because it's easy when you get married to be like, I'm waiting around our city group and it wants to be all people in the same exact life stage as us because it's just easier. You can hang out on Friday night, you can go on double dates and do all these things.
Yeah.
You're saying we're leaving that on the table because we want to run at these folks that are probably feeling what I felt years ago. So that's really cool. That's awesome. Brittany, what's some of your story and how did you get involved in this?
Yeah, so I have been single for many years now, but I was engaged at one point in time, and that went sour. And after that, I was just like, okay, like if I'm going to be single, how do I do this well? Like, how do I enjoy this season again when I thought it was like, literally going to end and never come back up? And so just started exploring like, what is singleness? Like Jesus was single, but what does that mean for me now?
Right.
And just had conversations with single person after single person. And then when I stepped into working at Citylight Lincoln, I had so many singles coming to me expressing their frustrations with like the Big C church and their approach to singles, and just asking me questions of like, how do I be in church and be single because I don't feel welcomed here. I don't feel valued here. And that's when I really like my passion for it really grew. Like, okay, God has placed me in church leadership as a single woman. So when is there's no better time for me to step in and go, let me step in the gap and let me help love the single people, but also help challenge those in leadership to think about the singles and to love the singles. And I've had opportunity after opportunity to do both of those things, to encourage the single, but also to equip the married.
That's awesome. I love that. And we're going to get into some of our current realities within churches and, you know, the amount of singles that call our church home and how do we get more practical. We're going to get there. But I just want to say, you know, you're talking to two people who are married, me and Jared. We both have 4 kids and a minivan. So we are in that season of life. Ballin', shout out. So, but I would say this, you know, it's interesting, these different seasons of life, how we have to both come back to the gospel of Jesus Christ, because for the married couple, they might be believing the lie, like, this is what I thought was going to satisfy me. If I get the ring, I get the house, I get the kids, I get the van, I get whatever. And then you wake up, you're married, and your spouse might be a Christian, might love the Lord, but guess what? You sin against each other. And it's funny how what Satan wants to do is tell you what you really need is your autonomy and your freedom back. You need to throw off all this responsibility in this covenant because you were happier over there, right? And so you need to look over the fence, and you end up admiring all your single friends because they have all this time and freedom, and they're not changing diapers and not sleeping. They're sleeping more than 3 hours a night. So it's all those things where it's like, it's tricky because then, you know, you look at singles and all they're sold is either this lie that says, man, hold on to your autonomy. Don't pursue marriage because that's going to be a weight. I mean, you need to preserve your autonomy and freedom so that you can have your own comforts. Or Hallmark is selling them that you literally will not find life and you will not have life to the full until you find that perfect spouse that is going to be the missing part that completes you. And so there's this culture war that's happening. Singles are feeling it. I think married folks are feeling it, but it comes back to the gospel. Like at the end of the day, the only thing that will satisfy our restless hearts is Jesus Christ. The only identity that will truly be the identity that we want to wear for all of eternity is a child of God, right? As a forgiven sinner that's been adopted into his spiritual family. And so whether it's married couples needing to say, Jesus, I believe in you, be my sustainer today. help me to be faithful to this covenant and help me to pursue holiness over happiness here. That person's leaning into the word and the spirit. And the single who's saying, I have desires and they're not fully maybe being met here. Help me to play this season well. Help me to be self-controlled. Help me to be holy. Help me to be a giver to the local church. Help me to leverage this season of my life for your glory, because God, you are ultimately my joy and my king. So all that to say is I just want to come back to, like, at the end of the day, we're talking about two different life stages, and I think there is a ministry approach. But my burden as a pastor is that regardless of what season of life you're in, single, engaged, married, empty nester, grandparent, you're never going to graduate from the foundational practice of abiding in Christ, finding your identity in Him, feeding on His Word, and taking on the posture of Jesus. My whole life is in worship to you. Mm-hmm. And so obviously it gets a little tricky. How do we do that practically? We're going to get into those seasons, but just want to preach the gospel to both. You're not less than. I think we all need to be relying on the Spirit of God, living as this spiritual family. So Jared, jump in here.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, got a cough here. What great timing.
Oh my goodness.
Here. Wow.
We'll cut that out.
Cut that.
I think one of the things that that what you just said reminded me of is my wife. She when she was single, before she met me, her best friend was married and was a church planter's wife, and she said they used to cry together all the time, and she was crying because she was single, and her friend was crying because she was married and didn't have freedom. And I'm like, it's a real life scenario that emphasizes the fact that, hey, we need Jesus. But yeah, and just to affirm both of you guys, like the fact that you've stepped into this and you see so many people coming to you and you've had so many opportunities is just a testament to the fact that this is needed, which is why we're doing something like this and speaking into it. So, okay, so Chris mentioned this before, but what is current reality? So this is not something that maybe singleness is maybe not something we talk about every day. You don't see the stats flash across headlines of news, but like in our country, in our churches, what is current reality of of singleness in our context?
Yep.
Yeah, so nationally, we're 54% single, but within the church, the Christian evangelical church, only 23% of our churches are single. So there's a huge gap. There's a huge need for singles to know and hear the gospel, but singles aren't stepping into church spaces. And when I was figuring, I was like, why is this?
Wow. Yeah.
Everything I saw was they push marriage on me. Like, they only talk about marriage. Like, there's no space for the single person here. But then I was looking at our context in the Citylight family, and while the national average is around 23%, our average is more around 40 to 45%. Yeah. So we have tons of singles in our churches, mostly because of the people that we're trying to reach. Like, being a younger focused church family, we have tons more singles than your churches
church
across the nation. Yeah.
Yeah, which is like partly we rejoice over, but I love that stat that you said that how many are in our culture, over 50% are single, right? So some of these are young adults like you guys were or are, and then some are widows or some relationships have ended and they found themselves single really on the back half. I kind of track some data too. It looks like, and so you kind of have this U-shaped demographic of young adults that are singles, but also plus 50s that are single, maybe by choice or not by choice. And so they're there. And so part of it is a mission thing, right? Brittany, I think you're saying we've got in the church only, 1 in 4 are single in our local church. There's a whole bunch of the demographic. And so we're not reaching our local context, right? Like, we're not reflecting the demographics that are around if we're not reaching them. And there's barriers there. They think the local church is only for people with marrieds and kids, and you're playing, the suburban lifestyle or whatever. And so that's when you kind of take on Jesus. But that's not what we want, right? We want singles to know, Jesus is for you now, right? Not just when you enter this life stage that the pastor might be in. And so there's a missional context there, and then there's a ministry context there. Like, how do we get better at loving, caring for, seeing, and investing in the singles within our ministry? So those are really good.
Yeah. So even like speaking further into that, so there's a study on like Christian high school seniors for that. Upon graduation, 2/3 of them end up leaving the church.
Right.
And so So we see like high school students who are like cultural Christianity. They're dropped off by their parents. They go to the high school ministry and whatnot. When they have the option to choose what they want to choose, a majority of them end up leaving the church and are no longer faithful. And then the same study did research, and they saw that 2/3 of those people that left the church end up re-entering the church, and it's when they start families. And so the dynamic there is that because they were raised up in this context, their family had a religious background and whatnot, that when they have their own kids and they go, okay, I turned out okay, I want to raise my kids in the same way with the same morals and whatnot, I'm going to bring them back to church. And so then you're missing on this gap between like high school senior to when they are getting married, closer to like the age of 30 or even like later on. And so there's like a 12, 13, 14 year gap where these people are unreached because like maybe they still identify as Christians, but they're not faithful to the church anymore. They identify because of their background. And so there's a huge opportunity for evangelism to reach out to them to say, okay, you identify as Christian, but do you actually understand the gospel? Is Jesus actually your savior? Is he actually your Lord? And then their ministry potential as well, for like you're missing on 13, 14 years of like them growing their faith. And if you care about like family dynamics in your church, care about young adults, because you don't want to be like, hey, now that you're a parent, let's actually teach you how to follow Jesus and pursue him. Like if you care about the whole of your church, the younger you start, the younger you invest in people, the healthier they're going to be in the long run. And so if you care about family dynamics, don't wait until they become families. Care for them when they're singles. Care for them when they're young adults in your church. And so not even is this just like, this is caring about like the family dynamics of the future, and then also the people like, yeah, they're missing out. And if they end up not getting married at some point and they don't feel like a need to come back to the church, it's like, what a wonderful place to evangelize and invite people in and be able to reach out to them.
Yeah, that's so good. You get me excited. I'm like, okay, let's do this thing. Let's go for it. Okay, so one of the things that we like to do around here, we like to talk about the Bible a little bit. And so we usually go there during the episode. But I'm curious, just for you guys, what does the Bible have to say to this issue? Is there something specific that we can pick up from the Bible about singleness? Are all single people supposed to, get married someday? Is that the goal? Is singleness somehow superior to being married in a different way? Like what have you guys gleaned from the Bible, and what do you teach these people that you're discipling?
Come on.
Yeah, so I think oftentimes you see like these Christian cliches of like stories or testimonies of like people saying, man, when I stopped looking for a spouse, that's like when I found them. And there's almost like this prosperity gospel of like, once you become content in your singleness, then the Lord's can provide for you a spouse. And there's nothing like that in the scriptures, that there's no promise that you are ever going to get married. And so when singles are like living their life, like hoping that someday they're going to get there, Britt will probably speak a lot into that idea of like, but it's not like an upgrade at all.
Preach.
And so like where the Lord has you, like where the Lord has like called you presently, you want to be using your giftings, you want to be growing in your relationship with him, not so that someday you will get married and be able to live like a different lifestyle or a better lifestyle. But the reality is that you could be single forever, because God doesn't promise that to you. Yeah. And so if you're living for like this next season of life, and that's where your hope and your dreams are, you may never actually get there.
Right.
You're wasting like so much instead of just being present for like where God actually has you right now.
Yeah, for sure. That's
good. Yeah. I like to take people back to 1 Corinthians 7.
Yeah.
It's like Jesus was single, Paul was single, and Paul said it is better to remain single than it is to marry. And that's not that singleness is better than marriage or marriage is better than singleness, but as singles, we have so much more space and opportunity to grow the kingdom, to like invite people in, to share the gospel, to go across the globe and share the gospel with people who've never heard the name of Jesus. And the reality is just that as a single person, I can pack up and go whenever the Lord calls me. As married guys, like you don't have that ability to be like, oh yeah, I'm just going to go do this thing. You've got to pack up your wife, you've got to pack up your kids. Like you have to pack up your whole lives to do that. And that's much harder for married people than it is for singles. But that's, I think, what Paul was getting at in 1 Corinthians 7 is that it's better to be single because you have the ability and the flexibility to just go whenever the Lord calls you.
Which is so good because I love the way that Paul talks about it. He speaks both marriages, 1 Corinthians 7. I love that passage. That is the chapter we would go to. That's the one we were talking about before the show as well, and just trying to get our minds around this. But the same idea that there is no varsity and JV position in the kingdom of God. You're a child of God, given the Spirit of God to participate in the mission of God. And so whether you are single or married, I love how Paul builds that tension out. Hey, if you're married, you have an opportunity to have a family and raise children and raise oaks of righteousness and make disciples in your home. If you're single, guess what? You get to be a spiritual mother and father or uncle or aunt to others. And you think about Julie Arendt, who's done international ministry here in Omaha, Nebraska, been a missionary all over the world, and is specifically called really to singleness. And she's leveraged her life to walk up to international students on college campuses and around our city and share the gospel with them, and literally led hundreds of people to Jesus. And her schedule is not the same as our schedule, right? Like there's a different rhythm to her life. And so I would wrestle with us, like even pastors and singles who are listening to this. Do we believe that? Because I think, Jared, like when you think about singles, I don't know about you, but I didn't feel like it was a blessed position in life. I wrestled with, do I even believe what the scriptures have to say about singleness? And if I'm really honest with you, I probably didn't always believe what the Bible said about that season. I was probably in a hurry just to get to the next season, if I'm honestly confessing. And then second, did I fill my life with ministry or just hobbies, recreation, and too much chill time in media and intramural sports and whatever it was? I don't know if I was as focused as leveraging my life for the glory of God other than just the passing of time and avoiding boredom. And I'm just keeping it real. So I wouldn't say I navigated that season as an A+. I'd probably give myself a B- there. But all that to say is just wrestling with some of those tensions that I think we in this season need to be willing to say, how do we engage with singles? Not the invitation is not just to find somebody, put a ring on it, and then now you can really become a member of our church.
Yeah. I think I would give myself an A+. So you feel like
evaluating your life. No, for sure, your righteousness is superior. I really do see that now clearly. Joking.
No, I had no, for real though. I feel like it's the same thing as you're saying that. I'm reflecting. I'm like, oh yeah, there was a sense in which, I could read 1 Corinthians 7, but like, am I actually embracing this?
I believe that.
Yeah.
I believe that.
Yeah. And I just think, I don't know, you guys are interacting, doing ministry with single people all the time. Do you feel like, how do you feel like the single people that you're interacting with are wrestling with that? Do you feel like they believe that? Do you feel like they're embracing that?
I think they do sometimes, and then other times they don't. But it all comes back to, do I believe that Jesus is enough? Because when I'm believing that Jesus is enough, when the single people I'm talking to are saying, yeah, I believe that Jesus is enough, then we're living our singleness well and we're using it for the kingdom. But when I'm able to go, or when the single people that I'm talking to are admitting to me and confessing to me that, yeah, I don't think Jesus is enough. Jesus isn't satisfying me, and I need a spouse for that. We need to be able to have those honest conversations. And when we have those conversations, then we're able to go back to the gospel and be like, no, Jesus is enough, and here's why he's enough. Like, here's what he says in scripture. And then when we finally get back to the place of going, yeah, Jesus is enough, then we reroute ourselves back towards Jesus, back towards the gospel, back towards growing the kingdom.
Yeah, Jake, what would you say?
Yeah, as I think about our demographic at Providence, I think about even a few serving team leads who run these serving teams who are single, and one dude in particular gets to church before I do every single Sunday, and then he also puts himself in the teardown team. And so I'm going there, and I'm at church on Sundays for 5 or 6 hours, and then there's a guy who's literally volunteering who has a full-time job as an engineer. He shows up before I do, and he usually leaves after I do. And so he is leveraging his singleness so well, and he's discipling 9 guys, discipling his dad. Shout out to Devin Brewer if he watches this. But so it's just so fun to see him in this season of okay, I'm not married, I love Jesus, I want to serve, and he's just doing it crazy. And thinking about that, he's putting in more time on a Sunday than like even like what I do.
Right.
He's almost discipling the same number of dudes as I do, and I'm doing like vocational ministry. That's because he has the freedom to be able to pursue both because he is single.
Yeah.
And so hypothetically, if he ever gets married someday, his ministry capacity is going to be reduced, and he's not going to be able to do everything that he was able to. And so what a sweet season that he's in to like to use that and to be able to like just bless the church, be able to bless so many people. He gets to literally look like Jesus and being a father to so many other people, and it's awesome.
No, it's awesome. So I just to come back to Jared's righteousness, what was the guy's name? Devin. What was his name? Devin. Yeah, clearly Devin outpaced you. So like you might be outpacing me, but I just want to really put it in context. Like, as I knew you then. There was no way you weren't at church at 4 a.m. stacking chairs.
No.
Like you were rolling in with your Starbucks at a solid 8:59. Like so, just
That's true. That's
Yeah.
true. And to give Devin an extra shout out, he hates mornings too. And
wow.
He's there first
Come on,
thing,
shout
so-
out.
Dude,
Way to go.
Dude is unbelievable.
Hey, quick question. As you guys work with singles, what are some of their felt needs that maybe we're not aware of? And we're asking, like, how do we engage them well? So it's really two questions. Like, what are you guys learning about singles that is maybe different than, like, the person with 4 kids? What are some ways that you can engage them creatively and uniquely? What questions are they asking that maybe we're not answering because we're not aware of it? And then, like, what can we as pastors, elders, that's who's listening to this, how do we incorporate a care for singles across our church so it's the culture that we're not promoting this JV varsity setting, but really helping the people know, like, we value you, we see you, we love you, you're welcomed here, and we have spaces that care for you. So how can we do that? What are their needs, and how do we incorporate that in the life of the church? How do we do that well?
Yeah, I think the first need that every single person has is just a need for Jesus.
Come on.
When I'm coming and I'm saying, I'm really struggling with singleness right now,
Yeah.
part of that struggle is also that I'm struggling to believe that Jesus is satisfying every need that I have. And so just meeting me with the gospel. Like singles need to be met with the gospel, not with good advice. And once our need of Jesus has been met, of sharing the gospel and pouring into us in that way, then there's space for that practical conversation, the practical application of, okay, well, if this is where you're at, what else do you need?
Right.
Like, do you want me to set you up? Do
Right.
you want me to help you build a
Yes.
dating
Profile.
profile on one of the apps? Or do you just need someone to eat dinner with? Do you
Yes.
want to come over and have dinner with my family? Like those invitations, and even just like single people like just don't get as much physical connection.
Yep.
So when appropriate, hugs are good.
Yes.
Like just the physical connection aspect is a big thing for so many single people. And so when it's appropriate, hugs,
Emotional, physical
physical
connection.
connection is great.
Yeah. It's good. That's awesome.
Yeah. And so like in a shepherding way. So yeah. So Brittany, we were talking before, and you're talking about how like, so if someone's like discontent with like their singleness and whatnot, like giving them Jesus, and then like later giving like, if they're ready for that, giving them the advice in those different places. But I think also just like on a Sunday morning or like preaching in like those different areas. Like if I remember like a few years ago, like this picture of a church was saying, like someone said, hey, we should make a wheelchair ramp for like our church so that people who are handicapped would be able to like attend. And someone else said, well, we don't need that because we don't have any people in wheelchairs at our church. And it's like, well, yeah, the reason why you don't have wheelchairs at your church is because
You can't
you don't have a
literally
ramp
get into
in
the
the first
church.
place. And so like sometimes we might think, okay, I don't have any young adults in my church, or I don't have any like single people who are actually present here. You're not going to get them by not creating spaces where like they're valued, they're loved, and where you're actually speaking into their life. If you're only going to talk about families, you're probably going to attract families into your church. And if you want to like have more young adults, if you want to have more college students, like speaking in ways that's going to be relevant to the lifestyle that they're in is going to help to pull them in, help to attract them. Because it's like, okay, I'm walking into this room, I'm not just valued if I'm a family, if I'm a part of a family dynamic, but I'm valued as a single person. And so in preaching, applications, whatnot, highlighting that and moving it towards like the people who are single can be just such a very helpful tool in showing people that they're valued.
Yeah. And single people catch up on that. Like one of the first times that I remember singleness being brought up at Citylight Lincoln was after I'd had conversations with multiple single people and then had conversations with the pastors. They talked about singleness in a beautiful way in a sermon, and I had countless single people coming up to me afterwards going, Brittany, did you hear them? Like, they talked about singleness. Like, that's what they want. That's what we want to hear. And when we hear those, we feel so seen and so valued and so cared for when we hear our pastors who have been married for multiple years talking about the beauty of singleness.
Come on.
That's awesome.
That is super helpful. It's one of those many things. It's like, man, note to self, like, right. It's convicting because it's one of those things that I theologically value. I think we would all say, man, this is a high value. You can't talk about spiritual leadership in the life of the church apart from Jesus and Paul. And, they both were single. And yet here practically, if you evaluate how much I talk about marriage, kids, family, rhythms, all the illustrations of my sermon, how few times in my applications do I acknowledge singleness and either champion it in a positive way, like you just did by telling a story of a single in your church that's really a hero, like literally doing this well. I think people need to hear that. Or, hey, here in this season of singleness, these are some battles you got to fight. Like, these are some things you got to do. So I remember also, Jared, just pastorally, when COVID hit, one of the people I was most concerned about was singles. And it's still an area that I'm still most concerned with because you look at the rising numbers of anxiety, depression, isolation, no physical touch, no words. What's replaced, like what you said, Jake, we used to have all these friends in college. We lived next to each other. Now there's all this isolation. You go to your apartment alone. You scroll on your phone. You watch a screen. You go back to work. You might have a few passing conversations. You go to the gym, talk to no one, go home, eat in your car, and then sit in front of a TV. I think people were built for more connection there. And what will happen to marrieds or singles is you can be pulled into isolation, relational isolation, spiritual isolation. And so how do we battle that? I think the local church should be saying, no singles, have community with marrieds, come over for dinner, don't just sit at home. I think we should have the culture where we're encouraging singles to get in the same place together. They need places to hang out on Friday night that are not the bar and the club, right? They need more than social media. So I'm thinking that's one of the ways that we need to just help invite that culture. But I'm wondering what's going through your head, Jared, as you think about how do I pastor singles better? Is there anything else I need to?
No, just everything you've been saying. It's like the whole 50. How many percent?
4%.
54%.
54%. I'm just like, the stat is still rattling around in my head. I just don't I don't give 54% of my concentration or you said, like applications or sermon illustrations to single people at all when I'm, preaching or whatever. And so and I think back to the times over the last couple of years where we've had single people over to our house for meals. And I'm like, man, I guess I'm right now feeling a conviction of a need for intentionality among this. So I appreciate you guys thinking into this. I mean, sitting in Providence, I see Jake and Rochelle and a couple of your friends who are like multiplication crazy people with city groups. You're just multiplying like young adult city groups like crazy. You just multiplied one out 2 weeks ago, right? One or 2 weeks ago. And just even thinking back to a couple of people in our congregation just yesterday who were in your group who were talking about how they just love and live for that community and how they've experienced so much life from that. And I guess I'm just grateful that even in some of the places where I've had blind spots or not been as intentional, there's people who have stepped into that gap. So thanks guys for being so intentional. And I feel like I've got a fresh conviction walking out of here today.
Yeah. I think I've even here have eyes to see some of the singles in our church. And like you said, just names start to surface of people who are playing different roles, whether it's in our high school ministry, mentoring ministry, kids ministries, counseling ministries, care ministries, missions overseas ministries that are really being led and spearheaded by singles that have space and time to give a late evening, to go overseas in the summer. And I just wonder, what would it look like for us to continue to mobilize singles, not use them, but mobilize singles to step into the kingdom of God and leverage that season? How would that impact our cities, our campuses, our communities, our local churches as their spiritual gifts are practiced? And I think it really comes down to partly us telling those stories, championing them, celebrating that, making that part of the culture. And so, man, you look back at the life of our churches, how much of that has been built on, man, I think about Dory Peterson, this widow. Yep. She's in a season, she's doing the books for free and laboring behind closed doors to help serve the church and administration, and it's blessed us. So all that to say, shout out singles. Thank you for your faithfulness, even when pastors like Jared and I miss opportunities. Thank you for your graciousness. And I just want to say thank you to you two. I'm just so encouraged by your faithfulness. Jake, just for you in the season of being married and saying, hey, we're not taking our hand off this plow. Like, this need's not going away. We're going to hold on to it. It's pretty beautiful and amazing. Brittany, the way you've been a voice, you've modeled it so well. And I think about all the conversations you have off stage with different men and women that are asking this question. So thank you for leading upstream, talking to your pastors, talking to me, helping us become aware of this issue. We want the Citylight family broadly. It's not going to continue to multiply disciples in churches if it's only multiplying families and kids. Like, we've got to figure out a way to engage singles and call them into the mission of God and care for them well. And so thank you for being that voice. We appreciate you so much.
Thanks.
Awesome, guys.